Welcome back. Now we return to one of our lead stories this hour as floods continue to wreak havoc in parts of Limpopo and parts of Mpumalanga. Amnesty International is calling for government to expedite the release of flood relief funding. In some flood-hit areas, cleanup efforts have already begun and communities are counting their losses. For more on this, I am now joined by Genevieve Quintal, who is the Communications Officer of Amnesty International in South Africa. Genevieve, a very good evening to you, and also a tragic story that is developing in parts of our country from Limpopo and Mpumalanga with these devastating floods. The death toll in Limpopo now stands at 11. From Amnesty International's side, what have been your observations?
Good evening, Master, and thank you so much for having us this evening. And yes, a very sad story, a story that we're seeing way too many times in the recent past. And, we're seeing more and more extreme weather conditions and the persistence of these severe flooding that we're seeing in many parts of the country. When we've seen KZN, Eastern Cape, underscores an obligation, and this is what we're looking at as Amnesty International, an obligation by our government to urgently implement human rights-based approaches to climate change and extreme weather conditions. And I know a lot of people are like, but this is a weather issue, it's a climate issue, if you want to look at it from climate perspective. But as Amnesty International, we need to emphasize that climate change, these severe weather conditions that we're seeing, are not just environmental issues, but they are human rights issues. It's a human rights crisis as well, because it is affecting people's rights to life, dignity, housing, water, food, health, a whole array of rights. And this is really, Masa, why we are looking at it and why we're calling on government to really start implementing some of the policies that we really actually have in place to ensure that people are, firstly, that things are put in place to ensure that people are not as badly affected, but secondly, when disaster hits like this, that there is relief for people and that they are helped.
You know, Genevieve, you speak about a human rights-based approach when it comes to intervening in such climate change, extreme weather events as well. If you could just tell us what that would look like, this human rights-based approach.
Absolutely. Firstly, we need something to happen as quickly as possible. They're basic principles of non-discrimination, equality, protection of vulnerable groups. Masa, last year in November, we released a report called Flooded and Forgotten that looked at the impacts on floods on people living in informal settlements and how badly they are affected by these severe weather conditions. The most vulnerable people are affected. They lose their homes, they lose their livelihoods, they lose their identification documents, and they lose their lives. It's unhealthy. So it's really also ensuring that those people, the most vulnerable, are also protected during this time. As I said, our government also has to plan ahead, and that's part of this human rights principle, plan ahead to reduce risk. And when people ask what that's about, it's upgrading infrastructure, it's ensuring that, and these are all rights, it's ensuring that people have access to adequate housing, something that's in our constitution. This is what we talk about when we talk about a human rights-based response. And then also just ensuring that people's rights are upheld even when we are dealing with a disaster, putting them in proper accommodation. And I want to use actually KZN as an example, Masa, that when in 2022, when they moved people away from the floods into these transitional emergency accommodation, they called them TEA facilities. It's like 3-4 years later, and people are still living in these places that are actually highly inadequate. They're inadequate conditions. They don't even reach the basic human rights, of access to water, etc. So really, these are the things we are speaking about.
Cotton Minister Velunkosini Hlabisa says tomorrow there will be a meeting that will be held to talk about this. And he says he feels that this devastation actually warrants a declaration of a national disaster. What do you think should come out of tomorrow's meeting?
Well, that's a difficult one, Mas. I think then the first thing that needs to come out, obviously, is a quick response, a thorough response, a response that ensures that people's lives are saved, a response that ensures that people are moved to safe places. And I think it's really about putting people first. We've noted obviously that I think it was yesterday the president said that a relief fund will be made available, and we ask for this every time, right? And we see it every time when relief funds. People say there will be transparency, we need accountability, and yet there are always issues. Is the money going to the right people? We saw again with KZN in the Auditor General's report how the fixing of certain infrastructure, the moving of people was delayed because the wrong contractors were appointed. So that means that money is being wasted. So these are the things that really, at the forefront, the first thing needs to be done is to ensure that people are put in safe, adequately safe places where their rights will not be violated, where they have access to water, to sanitation, to all their basic needs that they need.
You mentioned the KZN 2022 floods, and it's actually such a good case study because when we look at those people as well that were put into temporary shelters, some of them also got evicted from those temporary shelters. But it seems that the government has only managed to build, just over 150 houses since those floods. And, there was thousands of people who were left displaced and homeless. Now, if we had to take that into consideration, that with the 2022 floods, we're still trying to house those people in 2026 now already. What about the flood victims of 2026? Are we going to be having this conversation, Genevieve, in 2030 to say that those people now have also been left displaced? And it just snowballs, I guess.
Absolutely, Marcel. And unfortunately, I hope not. And this is why we're speaking about it, right? We need to put pressure on our government to ensure that this doesn't happen, that each year, because we're getting more and more of these severe weather conditions, the flooding, never mind, we haven't even spoken about droughts, but the flooding. So a big part of this, and in our report from last year, a big part of this is also government's obligation to ensure that we're not only reacting when the disaster happens, but we need to look at preparedness for these disasters. We need to look at fixing infrastructure, like I said, roads, so that, there are proper tar roads. We're not going to have roads washed away, gravel roads washed away, ensuring there are proper bridges, ensuring that people are not building their houses in flood-prone areas, which is such a huge problem because we have a housing problem in this country. And, as much as, and people will say, but government shouldn't be supplying houses to people. Yes, our constitution doesn't say government must give houses to people, but it must ensure that there is that people have access to adequate housing. So if people are having to build homes because there isn't enough housing, there's enough affordable housing, they're building their homes in formal settlements in flood-prone areas, that is a big problem. That is government's responsibility to ensure there's infrastructure so that people can either build their homes or live in adequate housing that's not going to put their lives at risk. And so we can't just look at what's happening now with the disasters and react now. Government, and we have the policies, and it's all there in our report. Government needs to go back, and we need to start preparing properly, ensuring that infrastructure is in place so that we don't have. It's not going to stop the severe weather conditions, but hopefully less people are going to die, less people are going to lose their homes if we are properly prepared.
Yeah, and Genevieve, just before I let you go, quite often when we talk about this, we speak primarily about the most important things, loss of lives, loss of homes. But then on the periphery, there's the domino effect as well of schools being closed, children not going to school. That alone in itself causes quite a big problem and a challenge.
Absolutely. And here we are, the first week of school. How many children in Limpopo and Mpumalanga didn't make it to school? The first week of the school year, and how long does it take for them? So absolutely, it impacts, like I said, the snowball effect, your right to education, your right to livelihood. Some people can't get to work, people lose their documentation. So absolutely, that's why we need to ensure and that infrastructure, that we are prepared for these things, because if we have the infrastructure in place, we maybe won't be as severely. I'm not saying that it takes away that this will never happen, but it won't be as severe, possibly, if we actually are prepared. And then we won't have children missing school, people losing their lives, people losing their homes, etc.
Genevieve, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.